The Crusades and their impact on European intellectual development. The Crusades, which spanned from the late 11th to the late 13th century, had a profound effect on European intellectual development. While often remembered for their violent conquests and religious fervor, the Crusades also played a crucial role in the transmission of knowledge between East and West. Through cultural exchanges, intellectual encounters, and the rediscovery of classical learning, the Crusades helped lay the groundwork for the Renaissance and the subsequent rise of European intellectualism. This exploration examines how the Crusades influenced intellectual development in medieval Europe, focusing on the transfer of knowledge, the role of universities, and the evolution of medieval thought. 1. The transmission of knowledge, contact with the Islamic world. One of the most significant effects of the Crusades on European intellectual development was the transfer of knowledge from the Islamic world, which had preserved and expanded upon the intellectual achievements of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Arabic translations of Greek and Roman texts. The Crusaders' contact with the Islamic world exposed them to classical Greek and Roman texts that had been lost or forgotten in the West. Islamic scholars had not only preserved these works but had also translated them into Arabic and, in some cases, expanded upon them with new commentaries. Greek philosophers. Works by Aristotle, Plato, and other ancient Greek philosophers were preserved and studied by Islamic scholars such as Averroes, Ibn Rushd, and Avicenna, Ibn Sina. These scholars wrote extensive commentaries on Aristotle's works, which would later be translated into Latin, introducing them to European scholars. The translation movement was instrumental in reintroducing classical thought to Western Europe. Medieval translators such as Gerard of Cremona and Michael Scott translated Arabic texts back into Latin, bringing critical philosophical, scientific, and medical knowledge to the European intellectual scene. Medical and scientific knowledge. Islamic scholars had made significant advances in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, which were transmitted to Europe during and after the Crusades. Notable works such as Avicenna's Canon of Medicine were translated into Latin and became important medical texts in European universities. The astrolabe, which had been refined by Muslim astronomers, was introduced to European scholars and used for navigation, laying the foundations for later advancements in exploration. Mathematics and algebra. The mathematical knowledge of the Islamic world, including algebra, was another key intellectual contribution. The term algebra itself comes from the Arabic word al-jabr, a term used by the mathematician al-Khwarizmi, whose works were translated into Latin and became essential texts for European scholars. 2. The growth of universities and scholasticism. The Crusades and the subsequent influx of knowledge from the Islamic world played a significant role in the intellectual transformation of Europe, particularly in the development of universities and the growth of scholasticism, a system of thought that sought to reconcile faith with reason. The establishment of universities. The rise of universities in medieval Europe can be attributed, in part, to the Crusades. As European society became more organized and stable in the wake of the crusading period, intellectual institutions began to flourish, driven by the need to educate clergy, administrators, and future leaders of Christendom. University of Bologna, 1088, University of Paris, 1150, and University of Oxford, 1167, were some of the major institutions founded during this period. They were places of theological and philosophical study, where scholars sought to integrate the newly rediscovered knowledge from the Islamic world with Christian teachings. These universities became centers for the study of theology, law, medicine, and philosophy, drawing on both classical Greek and Roman texts and the commentaries of Islamic scholars. Scholasticism, reconciliation of faith and reason. Scholasticism emerged as the dominant intellectual system of medieval Europe, aimed at reconciling faith with reason. It was heavily influenced by the rediscovery of ancient texts and the need to systematize theological doctrines. Thomas Aquinas, a key figure in scholasticism, synthesized the works of Aristotle, largely brought to Europe through the Crusades, with Christian theology. His famous work, Summa Theologica, sought to answer key theological questions using reason and philosophical logic, a hallmark of scholastic thought. Scholasticism became the intellectual foundation for the study of theology and philosophy in European universities for centuries, shaping the way knowledge was structured and debated. 3. The Crusades and the Renaissance. The intellectual currents initiated during the Crusades had long-term effects on the Renaissance, which began in the 14th century. The Crusades were instrumental in creating the conditions for this intellectual rebirth by facilitating the transfer of knowledge and fostering an environment conducive to inquiry and innovation. Humanism and the rediscovery of classical antiquity. The exposure to classical Greek and Roman texts during the Crusades played a key role in the development of humanism, a movement that emphasized the value of ancient learning and the potential for human achievement. Humanist scholars such as Petrarch and Giovanni Boccaccio were deeply influenced by the works of ancient philosophers and the newly rediscovered texts from the Islamic world. The study of these classical works encouraged a shift away from purely theological study to a broader exploration of human potential, science, and the arts. Art and architecture. The Crusades also had a profound impact on European art and architecture. The influence of Islamic art and architectural styles became evident in Gothic and Romanesque designs, especially in the cathedrals and churches built during and after the crusading period. The use of intricate geometric patterns, borrowed from Islamic art, and the development of pointed arches and ribbed vaults in Gothic architecture reflect the intellectual exchanges that took place during the Crusades. The printing revolution and intellectual exchange. The intellectual climate fostered by the Crusades set the stage for the printing revolution in the 15th century, which further accelerated the spread of knowledge across Europe. The printing press, developed by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-1400s, made the knowledge accumulated during the Crusades more accessible to a wider audience, thus amplifying the impact of the Renaissance. 4. The Crusades and the development of medieval literature. The Crusades also influenced the development of medieval literature, contributing to the creation of new literary genres and themes, particularly those related to chivalric ideals, warfare, and religious devotion. Chivalric romance. The Crusades inspired the development of chivalric romance, a genre of literature that idealized the knights and their quest for glory, honor, and Christian duty. 4. The Crusades and the development of medieval literature. The Crusades also influenced the development of medieval literature, contributing to the creation of new literary genres and themes, particularly those related to chivalric ideals, warfare, and religious devotion. Chivalric romance. The Crusades inspired the development of chivalric romance, a genre of literature that idealized the knights and their quest for glory, honor, and Christian duty. Epic poems like the Song of Roland and Chrétien de Troyes works about King Arthur and the Round Table reflect the values and ideals of the crusading knights. These works, while often fictionalized, contributed to the development of an idealized image of the knight, one that combined military prowess with religious devotion. The influence of religious themes. Religious devotion and the spiritual dimension of the Crusades found expression in literature through works such as hagiographies, biographies of saints, and religious allegories. These works sought to inspire readers to live according to Christian ideals, portraying crusaders and saints as embodiments of piety and virtue. 5. The Crusades and the formation of European intellectual identity. The Crusades contributed to the formation of European intellectual identity by helping to define the role of reason and faith in European thought and providing a bridge between the classical world, the medieval period, and the early modern era. Church and secular thought. The interactions between churchmen and secular scholars during the Crusades, especially in university settings, laid the groundwork for a more secularized intellectual culture in Europe. Although theology remained dominant, the rediscovery of classical texts and the growing influence of philosophy and natural science led to a broader intellectual environment that laid the foundation for the scientific revolution. Philosophical and religious tensions. The exposure to Islamic philosophy and reasoning sparked tensions between faith and reason that would be explored for centuries to come. The Averroist controversy, which arose from the ideas of Averroes, debated whether faith and reason could coexist or if one had to be subordinated to the other. Conclusion. The Crusades as a catalyst for European intellectual development. The Crusades, though often remembered for their violence and religious fervor, played a crucial role in the development of European intellectual life. Through contact with the Islamic world, the Crusades facilitated the transfer of knowledge, spurring the development of medieval scholasticism and laying the groundwork for the intellectual rebirth of the Renaissance. The blending of classical, Islamic, and Christian learning helped shape Europe's intellectual identity, influencing theology, philosophy, science, art, and literature.